Randy Meisner's name might not be the loudest echo in rock history, but the weight it carries, especially now, is undeniable. On July 26, 2023, the world quietly lost a man who was never one to chase the spotlight, but whose presence lit up an era. The founding member of the Eagles passed away at 77, leaving behind not just a legacy of music, but a story he never fully told until the very end. What he shared before his passing didn't just fill in the blanks, it flipped the whole narrative on its head. And once you hear what really went down, it's going to stay with you. In 1971, Randy was at a crossroads. Having recently parted ways with Poco, a band he helped build from the ground up, he was wandering the wide-open terrain of the music scene, unsure of his next move. Then, fate nudged him in the right direction. He crossed paths with Glenn Frey and Don Henley while they were backing Linda Ronstadt on tour. Add Bernie Leadon into the mix, and something intangible started to form. Not just a band, but a brotherhood of sound. There's this incredible image that lives in the margins of music history. 4 guys in a dusty motel room, passing a guitar around, harmonizing for the love of it. No contracts, no fame, just music. Meisner would later say that their voices clicking together felt like magic. And really, how often does something like that happen? That kind of harmony, literal and emotional, can't be manufactured. It was pure lightning in a bottle. For years, Meisner kept quiet about those days, never offering more than a soft recollection here and there. But shortly before he passed, he decided to finally pull back the curtain. And what he shared doesn't just change your view of the Eagles, it forces you to reconsider the cost of building greatness. Why now? That question lingers, begging for answers as you hear every detail of a journey that was far from idyllic. The band signed with Asylum Records, David Geffen's fresh venture at the time. And the band's name, chosen during a mind-bending trip in the Mojave Desert, no less. That kind of wild, chaotic inspiration shaped everything they touched. But make no mistake, Randy wasn't just along for the ride. His background in Poco and the Stone Canyon Band gave him a deep understanding of that new, genre-bending blend of country and rock. And his voice? It soared. Glenn Frey himself once said Randy could hit notes like nobody else, and they saved the toughest harmonies for him. It was a gift, and it became one of the band's secret weapons. Their debut album dropped in 1972, and it was more than just a collection of songs. It was a time capsule of American freedom. Take It Easy and Peaceful Easy Feeling felt like driving down a desert highway with no destination, just the wind in your hair. Meisner's bass was never showy, but it held everything together. He didn't want to be the star. He wanted to serve the music. And in today's world where everyone's fighting for center stage, that kind of humility feels like a lost art. But success has a price, and the bill came fast. Touring non-stop, living out of suitcases, missing birthdays and milestones. Randy was soft-spoken and deeply private, and the rock star life wore him thin. He adored performing, but everything off stage felt like a storm he couldn't quite navigate. The flashing cameras, endless interviews, and behind-the-scenes friction began to gnaw at him. Even within the band, cracks were starting to form. What began as a rich fusion of country rock began shifting toward a more aggressive rock sound. Glenn and Don were pushing for evolution, and Bernie Leadon wanted to preserve the roots. Stuck between them was Randy, trying to keep the peace while watching the sound they created together splinter. It was like watching your dream home slowly turn into someone else's vision. By the time On the Border dropped in 1974, things were already tense. Sure, the album gave them their first #1 hit, and Randy's harmonies were still irreplaceable. But something had changed. He admitted later that while the music was evolving, so were the dynamics, and not in a good way. That kind of tension brews quietly, until one day, It can't be ignored anymore. In 1975, the band released One of These Nights, and with it came the hit Take It to the Limit. Randy's performance on that track was nothing short of breathtaking. It climbed to number 4 on the charts and became an anthem. But behind the scenes, he was crumbling. That song, ironically, mirrored what he was living, stretching himself until there was nothing left to give. And that's when things reached a tipping point. Randy wasn't built for the endless whirlwind. The fame, the constant grind, the creative tug-of-war. It all started to crush the parts of him that made the music so special in the first place. Eventually, he stepped away from it all. Not because he didn't love it, but because sometimes even dreams can become too heavy to carry. That decision, as hard as it was, may have been his only act of self-preservation. Still, before he walked away, Randy helped craft something timeless. His voice, his presence, his soul. They're baked into every note of those early albums. Without him, there's no Eagles as we know them. He might not have shouted the loudest, but his influence was undeniable. At first, the Eagles looked like a tight-knit band of brothers creating something new and honest. But behind the harmony was a rising storm. Glenn and Don, likened to Lennon and McCartney, began steering the ship with a firm grip. And though the success kept rolling in, so did the resentment. Bernie Leadon, always the torchbearer for their country roots, was watching the band turn into something else entirely. That friction finally exploded when he poured a beer on Glenn's head and walked away in 1975. That moment wasn't just dramatic, it was symbolic of how far they drifted from their original dream. And right there in the middle of it all was Randy. He didn't make a scene, didn't throw drinks, but the emotional toll was just as real. As the creative control narrowed and the camaraderie dimmed, he started to feel like a stranger in the very band he helped build. Have you ever looked around a room you helped paint, only to feel like you no longer belong there? That's the quiet heartbreak he carried. They say every great band has its breaking point, but few reached it with the quiet devastation that haunted the Eagles during their relentless Hotel California tour. From the outside, the tour was a shimmering success, a golden road paved with sold-out arenas and chart-topping magic. But behind the curtain, it was emotional erosion, slow and merciless. For nearly a year, 11 grueling months, these men, already bruised by ego and unspoken rivalries, were trapped together in buses, hotel rooms, green rooms, and sound checks. Even brothers would have cracked. So when you take strong personalities already walking the tightrope of fame, exhaustion becomes gasoline. Randy Meisner wasn't built for the spotlight, not in the same way Don Henley and Glenn Frey were. While they leaned into the fame, feeding off the energy, Randy craved stillness. The glare of constant attention, the nightly roar of the crowd, it slowly wore him down. Physically, he was suffering. Stomach ulcers, low energy, a body screaming for rest. Emotionally, he was barely holding on. And yet, night after night, he stood under that blazing spotlight to deliver Take It to the Limit, the song with the most punishing high notes in the entire set list. That performance became a symbol of loyalty, of expectation, of pressure. Because even when his insides were in knots, Randy pushed through. But offstage, the world he loved most was slipping away. His wife, his children back in Nebraska. They were living their lives without him. He was watching his family slip through his fingers from thousands of miles away. The irony? As fans screamed his name, his own home life was quietly crumbling. The very success that elevated him was isolating him from everything that truly mattered. And when your heart is divided between the stage and your children's voices on the phone, something's gotta give. The tension among the band wasn't just artistic, it was primal. Joe Walsh would later say the problem was simple. Too many alpha personalities packed into one cage. When you put lions together, you don't get peace. You get a power struggle. And while that struggle produced an album that still echoes across generations, it left deep scars in its wake. Hotel California wasn't just a masterpiece, it was a monument built on internal collapse. It's almost tragic when you realize the beauty of that record was born from chaos. But the breaking point? It came with a bang in Knoxville. That summer night in '77, the Eagles were fried, mentally, emotionally, physically. Randy was running on fumes, sick and burnt out. Still, he delivered his signature song during the main set like always. But after 2 encores, he simply couldn't go on. He quietly told the band, "I'm done." That should have been enough. But Glenn Frey wasn't having it. He lashed out, sharp words, personal. And Randy, already threadbare, tried to retaliate. Security had to intervene. What began as a quiet plea became a moment of fury. A towel thrown in spite, words that cut deep, and silence that followed like a shadow. That one night spiraled into the end of something that had taken years to build. After Knoxville, Randy wasn't just sidelined, he was shut out. No more camaraderie, no more post-show hangouts. He wasn't part of the brotherhood anymore. And that kind of isolation? It's worse than any argument. He finished the tour like a ghost walking through a machine. July 9, 1977. Houston. That was his final show with the Eagles. No grand send-off, no curtain call. Just quiet departure and heartbreak. And in the months that followed, he did what few rock legends do. He disappeared. While others might have grabbed the nearest mic to tell their side, Randy did the opposite. He vanished from the spotlight. No memoir, no tabloid drama, no interviews packed with venom. He chose silence, and that silence became part of his legacy. The mystery, the humility. He had lived the rock and roll dream, but at what cost? When he did speak, it wasn't to spark new flames. It was to extinguish old ones. All the arguing, "It's over," at least for me, he once said. You could hear the weariness behind those words. He didn't want revenge, he wanted peace. Still, even silence has its pain. When the Eagles reunited in '94 for their legendary Hell Freezes Over tour, Randy wasn't invited, not even considered. He tried to reach out to Irving Azoff, hoping for some inclusion, some recognition. But the answer was silence. Again, in 1999, during the massive Millennium concert at the Staples Center, he hoped to join in the celebration. But the door stayed closed. And it's that rejection, so cold, so final, that still hits hard. How does a man help build a band, shape its sound, give it soul, only to be erased when the spotlight returns? But here's where Randy's story takes a turn. He didn't let it turn him bitter. He didn't lash out, didn't throw names into the fire. He held on to grace. Told people he didn't hold grudges against Don or Glenn. Even if the hurt lingered, he carried himself with dignity. That kind of strength? It's rare. And it's the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need applause to exist. Just before he passed, Randy finally opened up a little. After years of silence, he let people peek into the truth behind those years on the road, behind the lights, behind the fame. What he revealed wasn't flashy or explosive. It was raw, honest, and profoundly human. And in that honesty, we saw a man who had endured, who had loved deeply, who had been broken but never turned cruel. Randy Meisner didn't just walk away from the band, he walked toward peace. And that final choice? That's what defines him. What really happened behind the Eagles' glittering curtain wasn't a scandal. It was a slow, human unraveling. One that reminds us all, even legends are fragile. And sometimes, the softest voice carries the deepest story. It was about finding some kind of peace in a life that had seen both roaring stadiums and heartbreaking silence. And that's exactly what Randy Meisner chased in those final years. Something quieter, something softer, far from the noise that once defined him. He never needed the spotlight to shine. Still, when he showed up in 1998 for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, the crowd felt that silent wave of emotion sweep the room. Seeing him there with his old bandmates, it was like watching a wound reopen and heal at the same time. People weren't just cheering, they were remembering. And Randy? He was quietly honoring the journey, even if some of it still hurt. That loyal heart of his. You could feel it from the back row. But here's the twist that no one saw coming. Behind that calm presence was a man fighting private storms that rarely made the headlines. Around 2007, everything began to unravel. A major heart attack forced doctors to insert a stent. And that was only the beginning. Soon came a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and a cycle of hospital visits tied to his long battle with alcohol. The world had no idea how much pain he was carrying while keeping up that gentle smile. In the middle of all this, his marriage to Randy Meisner became a battlefield. In 2010, court documents surfaced where Randy requested a restraining order, claiming he feared for his safety. He spoke of her escalating substance use and violent behavior, accusations that painted a deeply troubling picture. It wasn't just emotional torment, it was real, consuming fear. That kind of fear changes people. The situation spiraled so far out of control that in 2015, a judge appointed one of Randy's closest friends, James Newton, as his temporary conservator. The reports were disturbing, claims of Randy allegedly threatening people with a weapon. Whether fact or fueled by distress, the reality was clear. Randy wasn't okay, and the system finally stepped in. And then came the moment that stopped everything. In 2016, during a heated argument, Lana Ray died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The details were shocking. The aftermath, even more so. Randy's world didn't just shatter, it vanished. He was so devastated that he had to be placed in a psychiatric facility. He told a judge, "I just want to get over this. I'm in a lot of pain right now." Not sorrow, not heartbreak, pain. Deep, human pain that doesn't fade with time or headlines. Yet even then, Randy didn't lash out. He didn't seek sympathy from fans or press tours. He disappeared into silence, not out of shame, but out of sheer exhaustion. And doesn't that speak volumes in an industry where everyone's always chasing the next headline? He could have raged against the Eagles, aired every grievance, every slight. But he didn't. He chose grace. He chose reflection. He even spoke kindly about the band in his final interviews. Sure, he admitted feeling like an outsider during his time with them, saying he often felt like he was in the band, but not really part of it. But instead of resentment, his words carried a quiet sorrow, like he'd made peace with the past, even if it still stung. And that iconic song, "Take It to the Limit"? He was misunderstood for years. Critics said he was being difficult by refusing to sing it live, but he explained that his voice couldn't always hit those notes anymore. It wasn't fear, it was physical, emotional. He didn't want to give less than his best. That's the kind of integrity fans rarely get to see. He'd recall the glory days with a smile, saying they had some great times making records and traveling the world. But then he'd quietly mention how he never really listened to their music after leaving the band. Occasionally, he'd hear a song by chance and think, "Damn, this is good." Imagine rediscovering your own genius like that. Quiet pride, without ego. Randy never chased fortune, but it certainly followed him for a while. At the height of his success, he could have drowned in luxury. But he lived modestly compared to many rock stars. Still, there was no shortage of elegance. If you loved the drama, the laughs, and the jaw-dropping truths, don't forget to like, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next. We've got more legends, more secrets, and more Hollywood fire headed your way. And hey, let us know. Was Mitchum a misunderstood rebel, or the original bad boy genius? Stick around because old Hollywood's not done talking yet. Until next time, remember, in a town full of stars, Mitchum didn't just act. He owned the shadows.